The Talksport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the Talksport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search Talksport Fan Network.
Hello, Cherries fans, and welcome to this Raw Reaction show where we're discussing that win against Manchester City. Now, before we get stuck into it, and you'll love to hear the rest of this show, I'm sure, here's a bit about our sponsors, Dental on the Banks. Find out what they can do for you, visit dentalonthebanks.co.uk. So, if you've been living under a rock, you wouldn't have realised AFC Bournemouth beat Manchester City for the first time in our history. We couldn't even beat them in Division 2 all those years ago, and they even had 9 men back then. Now, of course, we do have a very special guest. He's been on before. And it is a pleasure to welcome back from the Blue Moon podcast, David Mooney. Welcome back to the show, David. How are you doing, mate?
I'm not too bad, thank you. How are things?
Yeah, all good. I'm very, very happy, of course, after the weekend. Probably you're not so much, but we'll get into that and we'll cover it all off. But, of course, we've had an absolutely atrocious record against Manchester City, haven't we? Let's be honest. Bournemouth, it's lost until last weekend. Could you see this potentially coming?
So this weekend, or the weekend just gone.
Weekend just gone.
Largely because there's two things at play. First off, City had an unbeaten all-time record against Bournemouth, and that is unsustainable. Like that will always come to an end at some point. Like you look at records between teams, and people go, well, like the difference between City and X is quite big. So of course you would expect it to be unbeaten for a long time. Yeah. All you need to do is look at the record between City and Wigan. Wigan have not been a Premier League team for nearly 10 years now, and City just cannot beat them. They've played them about 3 times in that run and lost every time. So, it's not always a case of Club X has more resources than Club Y, therefore the result always goes that way. So we know that's how football works. And the longer it went on with Bournemouth, the more likely it became to end, if that makes sense, because you can't keep stringing those wins together. And then you get to the situation where you get to last weekend, where I think I don't know what Bournemouth fans would say about this, but I would go to the point of saying that Iraola and this current iteration of Bournemouth are probably the best in the club's history. Like, it's probably the best team you've ever had. And so like that immediately ups your chances of getting a result in games like this. And then you flip that on its head as well, and you look at the City side that's arriving there. It's a City side that traditionally in October, November time isn't in a good place and always kind of has to work something out. And it was ravaged by injuries. So what ended up happening was a meeting in the middle. Now, you look at the starting lineup that City named. Perfectly reasonable to expect that to go out and win that game. But at the same time, when you know how Bournemouth play and when you know the issues that City are facing, you kind of like it kind of levels the playing field a little bit. And you look at the results Bournemouth have had at home this season, especially at home. Chelsea won there, but it took an 86-minute goal. It wasn't a comfortable win for them. You've beaten Arsenal. I know they had a man sent off, but you've beaten Arsenal there.
Yeah.
Took a point off Newcastle, which I mean
should have beaten them, really.
Should have beaten Newcastle. And as down as some Newcastle fans have been about their season so far, they have had a good start to the season and they have played well. And so nobody was going to Dean Court thinking this will be a walkover and this will be like all the previous City games against Bournemouth. And then, like the starting 11 that City played, they were there in spirit, but not really in body. And what I mean by that is I think it was perfectly obvious when Nathan Ake came off, for instance.
Yeah.
They weren't taking him off as a tactical reason. They were taking him off because he could not do any more. Like he was physically at the point where he couldn't do any more. I don't think in terms of kind of the players that were around, Guardiola, I think was still carrying something. I think most of the defence are carrying something. Mm-hmm. And the very fact that when they went to Sporting in midweek, they played the young lad Simpson Pusi as from the start. Guardiola does not play young players. Like he does not chuck them in like to kind of sink or swim. So the fact that he was starting tells you that he had no other options. His hands were tied. So I think he rushed a few players back. He gave a press conference after the loss to Spurs in the League Cup in the midweek before, where he basically said something like, and like this isn't verbatim, so don't quote me on this, but he said something like, "I will never forget the players that have basically been have made themselves available when they maybe aren't ready." That like something to that effect. And it seemed to be a little bit of a pointed remark at a couple of players who maybe are close to being ready, but have said, no, I need a bit more time. I'm not ready to play, all that sort of stuff. When there are players going, look, I'm dying. I'm absolutely dying. I can't really run, but yeah, go on. I'll play one more game for you. And then it was all of a sudden all these players were back in the team for Bournemouth away. And you get that performance, and it's kind of like, well, okay, I understand why we get that performance because none of them are fit, none of them are ready to go, and I think maybe that's a failing on Guardiola's part where he could have looked at that team and gone, you know what, if this lot can't run, maybe the experience that they give is not enough to get us through this game. And instead, what we should be doing is trusting that the inexperienced younger players that are in the squad. Maybe the fact that they can run, they do have the legs. Maybe that might be the difference. And I mean, in terms of a performance at Dean Court, weirdly, I don't think City were actually that bad. I think they lost control of the game in a couple of spells. I mean, Bournemouth started really well and should have scored before you did score. Yeah. And then after you scored the second, you should have made it 3 when you hit the post immediately after. Those two spells are what City didn't control. But everything in between it, I wondered. I mean, you might be able to help me out here. You might be able to kind of give me an insight as to what the mood was in the stadium. But I have a feeling that you had two sets of fans there who weren't entirely comfortable. You had City fans who were watching it thinking, we're getting nothing out of this game. We're not playing well at all. But Bournemouth fans thinking, City are not letting us out. And while they're not creating any chances, we can't get up the pitch at the minute, to kind of relieve some of this pressure. When actually, like, both things were probably a bit true. City were not really likely to score, but at the same time, it felt like Bournemouth couldn't really get too much possession. And then half time happens, and you come out for the second half, and you're absolutely flying. And whatever Iraola changed, it took Guardiola too long to react to that, and it's 2-0 before you know it. And then, I mean, you look at the final 5-10 minutes or so. City had Bournemouth on the ropes for a bit, and that there's two kind of inputs to that. Is that Doku comes on when he comes on because I don't think he can come on any earlier. I don't think he's physically able to do any more than the 10 minutes he did. And if City were going to go gung-ho, they could only go gung-ho for a short amount of time because of the state of the squad. And it was a case of it just turned out to be a little bit too late. If that goal to make it 2-1 comes 5 minutes, 10 minutes earlier, then I think City have a real chance to get something out of that game. But as it happens, it didn't, and that's to Bournemouth's credit as much as it's to City's dissatisfaction, I guess.
Just taking it back to the injuries, because one thing I said before the game, of course, I looked at the City lineup and I thought, you've got Silva on there, you've got Gundogan, Nathan Ake, we know all about him, Haaland up front, Foden on the pitch. I was worried going into the game because of our record, and I couldn't see. I thought, well, a point would be an absolutely unbelievable result. I didn't see what happened coming. But then I did, looking at the bench and kind of reflecting, and I've always said that Manchester City have got strength in depth. But
It's
at
not
this
that,
moment
that
in time,
but
I'm not so
that's
sure.
never actually been true. Yeah, that's never actually been true. What they've had is a strength of squad that is unbelievable among about 15, 16 players.
Yeah,
And then beyond that, it's always been fringe players that come in and make up the difference. But because the squad around them is so good, it kind of helps carry them. So Guardiola has consistently worked with a very small squad. And we've had there's been an injury crisis this season, and listen, nobody's feeling sorry for City about injuries. They've won the title 4 years in a row. Nobody's getting the violins out, you know what I mean? But at the same time, it's kind of like this has always been a possibility. This has been something that could happen, and it just so happens that this season it has happened. There's been previous seasons where there's been an injury crisis, and the crisis has been 3 players that have been out, and that's just because of the size of the squad. And the run of games have been, they haven't got anybody who can play at left back, and they have a game on Saturday, a game on Wednesday, a game on Saturday, a game on Wednesday, and it's like, how are you going to manage this? Okay, well, we'll just have to do something else. Ake, that turned out to be the treble-winning season. Ake moved out there, and then Akanji moved out there for a bit. Then the year later, they bought Guardiola, and they went with centre-backs at full-back for a bit. So they always have had these problems, and they've always just kind of. There's a kind of misnomer about Guardiola on the internet. If you spend too long on the internet, you'll find people who say that he is a checkbook manager that has a massive squad. Well, checkbook manager, I can understand how you get to that, because City spend a lot of money, but like they haven't been the biggest spenders in a good few years now. They've only done squad maintenance rather than any sort of major overhauls. They don't have a big squad, and like he doesn't moan about it all the time. People think he moans about injuries and all this sort of stuff, and he doesn't. What he does is he has this line where he says, "Win, you have to win, yes or yes. Go like." What can you do? There are 2 things you can do. You can sit here moaning about it, or you can get on with it and try and win the game. And they get on with it and try and win the game. And most of the time they win the game. And so people go, well, you can't look at how awful this is. You can't compete with City. And sometimes, like at the weekend, they don't win the game, and then everyone goes, "God, what's wrong with City?" And it's like, can we just have a little bit of middle ground here? Because actually, there's not really a lot wrong with them. There's just a lot of players missing. That's kind of it at the minute. So that the depth thing has been a myth that kind of they have strength of depth. They don't have depth in numbers. That's probably the best way to put it.
The squad that went out though, and like you say, everybody on paper expects Manchester City to win against Spurs in the Carabao Cup. They expected them to win the other night against Sporting Lisbon. They expected them to beat Bournemouth as well. That is, I guess that's the expectation that Pep has built. And to throw it back a little bit, I know that it's been a very consistent squad, during those 4 years. He's made tweaks here or there, but I think that consistency has served Manchester City so well. But do you think it's coming to the point now where he does need to make some big changes, possibly to those players on the bench, on the fringes, to make that side stronger?
Tricky because this all ties into his future as well.
Yes, yeah.
Because obviously his contract is up at the end of the season. As we talk now, he's leaving in June. I don't know when. I don't know when football contracts run to. I think it's the end
June,
of June, isn't
I think.
it?
Yeah.
So, like as it stands, this will be his final season. And there's a new director of football who is coming in and will work with the current director of football up until the end of the season. There is certainly the argument that the squad needs a bit of a refresh. They've kind of sleptwalked into there's just no. I mean, Bournemouth saw it perfectly. City are so easy to play through the middle of right now. Part of that is that Rodri isn't there and won't be there all season. The other part of it is that City, in terms of how they play, they're not great out of possession. They're not a team that is particularly safe when they don't have the ball. When they do have the ball, they are very safe. And what that does is, the theory is that City don't create a huge number of chances if they don't take many risks on the ball. But the idea is that the opposition don't have the ball. And then when the opposition don't have the ball, they can't score the goal themselves. But at the moment, what's happening is City are not being very productive in possession. I mean, the Sporting game is a little bit of an outlier because they created so much in that first 35 minutes where they could have been 3-0, 4-0 up, and then Sporting find a way to play through the middle of them, and suddenly they're 4-1 down. But they have the build-up isn't quite as crisp as it is normally. And so City, in order to Bernardo said something interesting on Tuesday night after the defeat in Sporting, where they're finding it very difficult to create chances at the moment, and on top of that, they're also finding it difficult to take those chances. They've got Haaland, who scored 14 goals this season, who is far and away ahead of anybody else. The second top goal scorer, there's 5 of them. 2 of them are defenders, and they're all on 3 goals. So they're not supplementing the goals from elsewhere. So if Haaland doesn't score, and I thought the Bournemouth defence did a very good job of keeping him out of the game. So if you keep him out of the game, City don't really have much of a goal threat outside of that. And it feels odd to say that given the attacking talent that's in the team. We know Foden is a goal threat. We know Bernardo is. Savinho and Doku aren't particularly posting the same sort of numbers as previous wingers that City had. Grealish, when he's fit, isn't a particular goal threat. So there's not as many kind of options for City to go on and get the stodgy goals, the heavy goals that win you games like that. And so combine that lack of chance creation with the ease at which the other team plays through. City have to be really, really good for 95 to 100% of the game in order to get the goals that they need right now. And the opposition only need to be good for 20, 30% of the game. They get the ball, they need to hit on the counter-attack really, really well. And you look at what Iraola does, especially at Bournemouth, and you look at the games in last season. The game at the Etihad was an absolute bloodbath, and he spoke afterwards about. I think that's when he said his regret was going to a back 5, and then you look at how you approached the game at Dean Court last season. And that was not a comfortable game for City at all. And they got out of that. They scored a stodgy goal and got out of there, basically. And then the plan, I think, was very much the same, to do the same this season. But it just, like, Bournemouth's out of possession play was so it was so good at funneling City into areas where City didn't really have the threat to attack with. There's sure, give Kyle Walker the ball because he's not scoring from distance and he's not putting in a cross that's gonna find Haaland's head. Let him have it, that sort of thing. And then on top of that, on the break, Bournemouth are actually really good. And Guardiola said after the game about Bournemouth playing long balls. The idea that City have all the time is when they don't have possession, they press the other team in such a way that the other team plays it long, and then City back themselves to win the duel. Except when City did that and forced Bournemouth into playing long, Bournemouth kept winning the duels, and then suddenly when you win the duel at the other end, you've got a 3-on-3 or a 4-on-4, and suddenly you're kind of like, this is a problem now. City have been played straight through here, and I think the issue at the minute is it all comes back around to Rodri. There's nobody who can put out those fires in the way that he does, and the solution at the minute of having one of Kovacic, one of Gundogan, both of Kovacic and Gundogan in there, they're both. Gundogan's not in form. There's question marks about whether he's lost his legs a little bit in his year out at Barcelona. And Kovacic, he's too easily played past. He jumps from his position forward to try and press far too easily. and then 1-2 bang, quick pass, you're around him, and once you're the wrong side of him, he's not catching you, and that's been a bit of a problem for City this season. And credit to Iraola, because he will have known going into that game that City wanted to control as much of it as possible, and he was able to make it chaotic in moments that would exploit City's weaknesses and give Bournemouth a chance to create something. And I mean, you created the two goals that you created were superb. And then on top of that, there was the double save that Edison made at the start of the game that really should have been 1-0 at that point. And there was, I can't remember who it was that hit the post, but that move that led to them hitting the post was that should have been 3-0 and game done. So you look at kind of those sequences that have allowed Bournemouth those moments. It's a combination of smart management from Iraola and City not being able to put out the fires that they would normally put out quite comfortably.
I think, I completely agree with you on that. This is the best side we've ever had. And Eddie Howe is an absolute legend at this football club. Nobody can ever take that away from him. We wouldn't be here without him. But I do feel that Iraola, the style that he's implemented, which didn't really take off. I remember when I spoke to you at the start of last season, and I was a little bit doubtful, and I felt, is it going to work? I think we'd just beaten Burnley at that point as well, if my memory serves me correctly. So we finally got a win on the board, but I was concerned that we didn't have the personnel to play this high press. We certainly do now. We've got this side playing that sort of style. And I think that caused Man City, of all teams, quite a lot of problems, because you had Semenyo, Tavernier, they were all pushing forwards at every single possibility. And against City, a lot of sides would sit back. And comparing this to, of course, you were beaten by Wolves last season, our former coach, Gary O'Neill. Before that, was beaten by Brentford. I know that Villa was the last defeat before this one, in what was, I've got to be honest, David, I think that City were excellent that day. I just think Villa were like a side possessed.
I think when my memory of those games, so where again, like that, there's no right or wrong way to approach a football game, and like I think Guardiola's very good at making it known how he likes teams to play, but also not being critical of teams that choose to play other ways. So Wolves earlier this season, for instance, where City won 2-1 with a last minute Stones goal.
Yeah,
that game, Wolves had very little ambition to leave their own penalty area until the time was right. And that's not a criticism. That's a perfectly valid approach to a football game. And I was speaking to Nader Manua recently about that sort of mentality, because I put it to him that I said that feels risky, because what happens if City score? What happens if City score first in that game? Your game plan is to sit deep and do nothing, and suddenly you're now already out of the game. So what do you do? And he said to me, you get a player to the byline in a crossing position, and they look up and there's 11 defenders in the box. That doesn't feel very risky to me. That feels quite safe. So it's about hanging on in there. And there are teams who will have to hang on in there because they don't have the personnel to press, and they don't have the personnel to play a certain way. So be it. Like, City have to find a way to get through that. And then you look at what Wolves had done the year before. It had worked for them doing it that way because, again, City were without Rodri that day, and they had an attempt to try and stodge up the middle of the pitch to stop any of those counterattacks, but they couldn't deal with the counterattacks, and it was Hwang on the break who did the damage. And it was I think Pedro Neto who was fast, basically faster than Nathan Ake. And you'll know this as a Bournemouth fan, Ake, low key, really quick. So the fact that he was being done by Pedro Neto shows kind of what Wolves' threats were on the counter that they didn't have earlier this season, and it still took City a last-minute goal to get through and win the game. The Brentford game and the Villa game are actually quite similar. for different reasons, which I know like seems like an oxymoron, but like, it does make sense. Yeah. They were both really good at the counter attack, real quick counter attacks. Brentford played high to Tony, and Tony, as I was saying before, won the duels. And like, City like making the other team go long, because more often than not, Diaz, Ake, Stones, they will win the duels. On that day, Tony was winning everything, and that meant that it got Bournemouth Brentford a foothold up the pitch. And City ended up losing it, trying to win it. They took a risk on in the 93rd minute or whatever, and it opened up a Bournemouth break. And Villa were just fantastic. I don't agree with you about City being good. City were only as good as Villa let them be, and Villa did not let them be good at all. They couldn't keep the ball, and they couldn't create anything. Again, they were without the common theme is they were without Rodri again. But like, injuries happen, suspensions happen. You've got to find a way to deal with it. It's that Guardiola thing of what you're going to do, moan about it or get on with it. You got to get on with it. So let's go. And Villa were fantastic, and it like that City got out of there with a 1-0 defeat, I think was actually quite a positive, because it could have been a lot worse. And so kind of reflect that to whether you should press or you shouldn't press. It all depends on kind of your players' ability to understand when to go and when not to go. And Bournemouth, certainly under Iraola in the last kind of 18 months or so, have understood kind of the out of possession, how to manipulate the ball into areas where you want it to be. And you were not very comfortable. You were comfortable when City had possession, because you kept funneling it into places where City couldn't really create anything with it. And City were trying to work it into the central areas where they could create something with it, and it just wasn't happening. Now, what that kind of does is I understand it from back in 2016 or so when City started it. When you keep the ball and you make risky passes across your own area, the margin for error is quite small, because if you give it away there, the opposition have a very high chance of scoring. But at the same time, if you don't give it away, if you draw the opposition into a position where they are trying to get it off you, and then you can exploit the space that they've created, you can create a little kind of false overload and a false counter-attack. And I call them a false counter-attack because it is a counter-attack, but it's a counter-attack from a position where the opposition have not been attacking. So reflect that from a Bournemouth point of view, because what City do is a little bit interesting with that, is that when you have possession in your own area and you're making risky passes, Southampton did it to City as well like the weekend before. What you're doing is you're dragging the City players higher up the pitch in order to try and create some space behind them. And Southampton then tried one or two quick passes to get around Kovacic, and I think Gundogan played in that game. Gundogan came on later in that game, but the same sort of thing. Like try and along the floor get it around there. What Bournemouth did is they drew everybody up the pitch and then went, right, we've got better physicality than you at the top end of the pitch, and we've got better pace than you at the top end of the pitch. We're going for that now. And they played it quick and long over the top. And but like in this instance, a long ball is not a criticism. It's not a Sam Allardyce long ball where it was okay, just boot it up and see what happens. It was a very calculated long ball of there is all this space there, and we've got guys that can exploit the space, so we're going to use it. Bang, here we go. And what City are trying to do, when like flip it around the other way, when City have possession, they're drawing a team up the pitch. They're trying to get that passage through, because City don't like counterattacks. City don't like trying to counterattack against the other team. If Bournemouth have been on the attack and they give the ball away, you'll notice that City don't try and exploit the space that's been left. What they try and do is keep possession, let Bournemouth get back into shape, and then play it from there. Because what they don't want is a basketball game. They don't want you attack, we attack, you attack, we attack, because City will lose that. They're more often than not, when they're not stable, they're more likely to concede. And they see the trade-off as, sure, the opposition aren't stable right now, but we're not stable either, and there's more chance that they exploit our instability than we exploit theirs. So let them get stable, let us get stable, and when everybody's level and everybody is in a stable position, we're more likely to score. So we're going to go on. That's how we're going to do it. And this season, that hasn't been as effective as it has been in previous seasons, and that's kind of how you end up with a game like you got on Saturday.
I think one of the players that had an outstanding game for us was Milos Kerkez. And I completely agree, David, that we were kind of channeling you into positions where it was more difficult. And a lot of that has to go down to Kerkez, but he's also very, very good going forwards. Of course, Adam Smith, a veteran now, really, I would say, of this football club. He's been here over 10 years. Again, he's not probably got the pace, but again, Iraola has got him utilising his body and getting himself into positions which makes it even more difficult, even though he might not have that pace. But um, what did you make of our going forwards? With Kerkez, of course, he set up both goals, and Anton Semenyo is a man that I've raved about for a long, long period of time. I can see him going to the very top. I can see him going to a big six club. I think we've just got to enjoy him whilst he's here. What did you make of the attacking mentality of Bournemouth and how City coped with that really at the back line?
So this is probably not the answer you want, because I don't know, because I don't really see. I've been absolutely pet pilled over the last kind of 10 years or so, and
Yeah.
I've drank the Kool-Aid, taken the medicine, everything like that. So I don't see teams attack, like I don't see teams as attack and defense. I see it
Yeah.
as a team performance, and that's why I think Bournemouth were good at the weekend, because the
Yeah.
team, like, it wasn't the defense was strong and kept City out. You kept City out because the attack performed well with the defense, and you did well out of possession and in possession. And so it's not a how did we do in the final third? It's a how did we do over the overall, like over all the pitch, to manipulate the game into what makes it advantageous for us rather than the opposition. And I go back to that point I made at the start. Chelsea found it difficult there. Newcastle found it difficult there. Arsenal found it difficult. It's all because Bournemouth and Iraola know how to manipulate good teams into positions where they don't want to be. And this is the kind of the sad thing about football. So I'm 36 years old. Just about. I'm about to turn 37. I remember a time when City were a mid-table Premier League side, and they were okay. They didn't have this level of, they didn't have anywhere near this level of understanding of how to manipulate a game. What they could do was battle in various instances, score a goal here and there, and earn enough points to flirt with relegation, flirt with a European place, but never really seriously be in trouble with either. And end up finishing somewhere between 9th and 14th. And what that does to you as a fan is, I remember at that time looking at other teams around that point and thinking, why are they that good? Why are they, like, I remember looking at Wigan Athletic. Wigan came to the Etihad, or Eastlands and City of Manchester Stadium as it was then, in 2007, beat us 2-0, and Caleb Folan scored both of the goals. And I remember looking at Caleb Folan thinking, he scored about 15 goals this season. City's top scorer was like Georgia Samaras on 6 or whatever it was. And I'm kind of like, why have we not found him? Why are we not able to find those sorts of players? And you look at what the middle of the Premier League is now, and you've got teams consistently who understand space, who understand possession and out of possession play, who understand where to push, when to go, when not to go. And I think you kind of take into account like Fulham, Brighton, Bournemouth, Brentford, these sorts of teams who aren't big six teams, but have a real understanding of how to play against the top teams. That actually what has happened is maybe it's just inaction of the Premier League, of how the Premier League has got further and further away from the Championship over the last few years. We all, like when City came up in 2002, everyone talked about how good City finishing 9th was under Kevin Keegan, because the gulf between the Premier League and the Championship at the time was so big. You can't override this gulf. And then you look at where it is now, and it's like you can you can play really open and attacking football, as Southampton did in the Championship last season, and be really good. Burnley the year before were really, really good in the Championship and absolutely wiped the floor with it. Came up and were mincemeat for the Premier League, because the Premier League has moved on to a point now where the mid-table teams just know what they're doing, and they know, like, they're so good at knowing what they're doing. And I think to bring it back round to City and kind of this season, I think what worries me a little bit about this season is, I think it's fair to say in all these games that City have had this season, the opposition have played well. Bournemouth played well, Southampton played well, Newcastle played well, Sporting played well. There comes a point where you have to go, surely everybody can't just be playing well against us. Surely there must be an issue here that is allowing the other team to play so well against us. So there's that for City to sort out. But they're doing it at a time when everybody else in the league has never been better. Literally everybody in the league knows how to do this sort of stuff now. And I think it's a real credit to the fact that you look at the managers that are in the league now, and it's the likes of Iraola, it's the likes of what's he called, Fabian Hertzler at Brighton. These sorts of coaches are not Sam Allardyce. They're not like I literally can't think of anyone but Allardyce. But that's sort of Pardew, yeah, those sorts of managers from years ago, where it's a little bit up and under, they don't like it up 'em sort of thing. And we've kind of moved on from that. And like it's kind of Guardiola's biggest blessing and curse is that the blessing is he loves teams that do that, because he likes when teams have a go and play good football. Yeah. But at the same time, that actually makes them harder to play against. And people always think he praises managers for playing open attacking football and possession-based football because it makes them easier to beat. And actually, it doesn't. City play Brighton this weekend. And I tell you what, it's been a long time since City have gone 4 defeats in a row. There's a real chance it happens this weekend, because Brighton will not be a pushover. And as open as they are, that City will find it really, really difficult to play against them. In many ways, as a fan, I actually prefer it when teams sit in deep and don't have any ambition of getting up the pitch, because, they might have a counter-attack, but the chances are City are going to have a lot of the ball. And when City have a lot of the ball, they tend to create good chances at some point. So, let City have possession. Don't attack City. I don't like it.
To be honest, you can't play Everton every week. Let's be.
They're probably the only team that don't fit that criteria that I've just said. Yeah,
exactly. Sean Dyche is probably stuck with Allardyce and Pardew and all those sort of people. From what you've seen, this weekend just gone. Moving away from this game, could you see Bournemouth seriously getting into Europe this season? Because at the start of the season, David, I said 10th, I'd be happy, brick by brick, step by step. I don't know whether or not we have got that strength in depth, really. We've had Tyler Adams out for a long period of time. Alex Scott is now out for a long period of time as well. So there was that concern, and of course we've seen it with Wolves, we've seen it with other sides. Ipswich is probably the best example, where they went and finished 5th all those years ago and then got relegated.
You don't need to remind me about that season. They relegated us that season. So
did they? Sorry.
There's a real rivalry between City and Ipswich from about 1999 to 2001.
But could you see Bournemouth seriously getting into Europe this year? Because I think that's what Bill Foley's aiming for, if the fans are probably a little bit more realistic and a bit more grounded.
If I'm honest, probably not. And that's not a slight on what Bournemouth have done this season. It's basically a look at the competition that is there.
Yeah.
I don't know how many European places England will have next season. I think they'll have 5 Champions League places, won't they? And then after that, I don't know where the kind of Europa League and Conference League is divvied up. But let's, for argument's sake, say you've got to get into the top 8. Yeah. The top 4 is probably going to be, City, Arsenal, Liverpool, and then one other. At the moment, my hunch is Chelsea, but it could be Aston Villa, and it like the way that they play.
Yeah.
You've got Nottingham Forest currently sitting there in 3rd. They're not staying there. They're going to come down to around about Bournemouth's kind of mid-table level at the moment. Then the rest of the places are going to be divvied up by about 10 teams. So you've got like Spurs are going to be in there. You've got Brighton that are going to be in there. I think Fulham will be in there this season because I think Marco Silva's a good manager. Newcastle, I mean, look at the table directly below you. You've got Newcastle and Brentford, who we've already talked about as being good teams. I don't think you'll be troubled by as low down as West Ham. I don't think West Ham are a great team this season. But surely Manchester United can't sit in 13th and can't sit like that low down for that long.
I don't rate them at all, David.
No, I don't rate them at all. But
they're terrible.
But at the same time, they have a manager coming in now who, like, even if has nothing else, has the bounce of a new manager for a few weeks. So that they're surely going to pick up for a little bit, even if they level out again and drop down the table. But what that does is it means there's probably about 6 teams fighting for 3 or 4 positions, and I think at that point it just gets difficult. I think then it becomes blind luck based on whether you can start seeing out games that are tight and like especially against rivals, and if you can keep players fit and avoid suspensions, because ultimately one of the things that what City's poor form comes down to at the minute is the fact that everybody's injured. If everybody was fit, they probably have won a couple of games in the last week, but they haven't. So that's that. You can only play the hand that you dealt. This is the hand that you've been dealt. So you need a bit of luck. You need the ball to bounce in the right way like that, and then see where it goes. My gut instinct is that for Bournemouth this season, it's probably a bridge too far. I feel like the likes of Newcastle, Brighton, Fulham, Tottenham are probably likely to get there ahead of you. But that's not to say that I've been wrong before. That's not to say I'm not wrong about it now. And we'll kind of see how it goes. I would love it if you were to finish above Manchester United. I would love it if every team in the league were to finish above Manchester United. I hope that their slide into irrelevance continues for as long as we all live.
Do you know what? I did make a prediction the other day, and I said that we would finish above Manchester United. So
I hope you do. I think it's a real shame that. So I don't want to go to. I've already taken up a lot of your time, but I don't want to dive too much into kind of City folklore and history from the 90s. But in the early 90s, City and United were neck and neck. City were newly promoted in '89. They beat them at Main Road 5-1. Ferguson's job was on the line, a couple of years earlier, all that sort of stuff. And what happened in the 90s? I think the final season before the Premier League started, I think City finished 5th and United finished 6th, and like they were 2 clubs that were both like they had powerhouse potential. And what happened is City decided to do a lot of batshit insane things throughout the 90s. They sacked managers and they appointed the wrong managers. They bought a lot of players. And then, so from 1991 to 1999, 8 years later, United have become a powerhouse of English football. They won the Premier League the first year at the right time, earning more money than anybody had ever earned for winning the top flight. They then invested that correctly and invested it well. City, meanwhile, invested their money badly. They sold good players and traded them for bad ones. And the gap between the two sides was never bigger 8 years later. And it was wafer thin in 91, 92. By the end of 98, 99, there'd never been more positions in the league between them because City were in the 3rd tier and United were champions. And the really, really, really annoying thing is that 20 odd years on, no matter how bad United get, they can't sink as low as City did because of the way that people moan about the football finances, and I totally get it. I totally get that the finances that City have is very, very unfair compared to what everybody else has. But this is just late stage capitalism. This is just the end product of what everybody created earlier on. The monster that United created in the 90s when they started winning it actually means that they probably can't get relegated. They can be awful, but they can have enough individual brilliance to win enough games to stay up each season. And City didn't have that safety net when they were awful in the 90s. And now, we're where we are. Somebody richer than City will come along in a few years' time, and if you believe reports, Newcastle have done it. The restrictions on how they can spend are obviously there. And that's just everybody pulling the drawbridge up to stop it happening again. What happened to City? And like you look at kind of where the future of football goes. Like people talk about it as doomsday, as like the end of the world. I don't think it is. I'm an eternal optimist. Like you punish City. Like let's say City are found guilty of the 115 charges or 130 or what it actually is. You kick them out of the league, stick them at the bottom of League Two. The inequality still exists. It's like just because you've removed City doesn't mean you've removed the problem of inequality. The inequality will always be there as long as football is a capitalist structure. So it is what it is. And again, that probably makes it difficult for teams like Bournemouth because you will hit a glass ceiling. You'll hit a point which you just cannot get any higher because take Leicester, for instance. Leicester had a really, really good run where they broke FFP, I believe, to get out of the Championship in the first instance. But then they did that. They won the Premier League title. One bad season, and suddenly they're out of it. They're relegated. It's like that. That's because they're not one of the powerhouses that has all the wealth, and it just the way it is. The only way to actually solve that problem is to rip it up and start again. But then, when you speak to fans like me, for instance, you know what? I like winning. I like winning things. I'm not quite that keen anymore to rip it up. But when City were a mid-table Premier League side, I quite wanted to rip it all up. These days, not that interested in it. Funny that, isn't it?
We're just happy being here. And, to be honest, I do agree with you on that Manchester United point. And where do we go with Everton? That's a whole different story.
Like
isn't it?
Everton,
another one.
They're in dire straits because I'd have said 4 or 5 years ago, a relegation would have been a good thing for Everton because they'd go down back to the Championship for a season, get some good feeling back around the place, come back up again, and they'll be in a much better place. Now, if they go down, I'm not convinced they're coming back up. That's the issue.
I think they'll be playing in a massive stadium in the Championship forever and more. To be honest,
they've just got to stay up. That's the key. I mean, you look at teams like Bournemouth as well. I think Bournemouth did a really good job of going down and like a kind of a managed decline with a long-term view of being able to build on where you've been at, and it's worked wonders. I think you look at this. I as much as I say I don't think you'll qualify for Europe, I think you're in for a real good season. You've had some great results at Dean Court already this season. And like translate that to 1 or 2 good away results, and you're absolutely laughing. You'll have a good year. It's funny because as much as I'm downbeat about those middling City seasons in the mid noughties, there were some good games in there, and that's because at the start of the season you set your expectations based on where your club is at. Like when I was a City fan in 2004, I wasn't sitting there thinking it'll be a bad season if we don't win the league this season. I think that now because I look at the resources City have and what they've spent and the players that they've got. Of course, like you judge based on what your kind of your expectations based on your situation at the start of the season. It is as it has always been. It's just a bit more unequal now than it ever has been. But in a weird way, it's more unequal off the pitch, but it's never been more equal on the pitch because again, I think that there's a lot more teams that can take points off the big boys this season.
Do you know what? It's just nice that we got one over on you. I don't know when it's going to happen again. Let's be honest, we've waited all these years. And even when we were in Division 2 together, we couldn't even beat you at that point.
I mean, that was...
you were down to 10 men as well, weren't you?
We were down to 9 men. We had 2 men sent off at Dean Court. Yeah. That was because the Dean Court game is the game where... Jamie Pollock was sent off. I interviewed Jamie Pollock a few years ago, and he said to me it was a nothing challenge. And then I found it online, and it's like knee high, 2-footed. It's like it's a clear red. Like by those days standards, it was a red card. So these days, like it was like bordering on a 10-match ban sort of challenge. But then with a few minutes to go, Kevin Haaland got a second yellow card, which he says. And Joe Royal, the manager, says was issued to him for walking aggressively towards the referee. The referee years later told me that it was for foul and abusive language. I suspect that is probably the case. And but there's a lovely story in City folklore that Kevin Haaland was sent off for walking aggressively towards the referee.
We want players like that back, though, like the likes of Vinnie Jones and Duncan Ferguson and all those players. We shan't mention Roy Keane, although I have just mentioned him. But
No,
yeah,
I'm more than happy to consign those. Like, listen, look at the style of play in which you have just beaten City.
Oh, exactly.
You can't turn around to me now and say, actually, I preferred it when everybody just kicked 7 shades out of each other. You're playing really good football and beating big teams. Like, carry on doing that. That's good, entertaining stuff,
mate. Honestly, it's been a remarkable run actually of games, but I spoke to Adam Smith the other day, very, very fleeting conversation, and he said, and he's put the City game to the back of his mind, and it is now about carrying it on. That's all he said about was, I said, a fantastic result against City and Arsenal, and his process of thought, and that shows what a determined, good side Bournemouth are and what Iraola's put in them, that their thoughts are now on, yeah, we've got this fantastic result. We've just got to focus on Brentford.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Actually, looking at the fixtures for you guys: Brentford, Brighton, Wolves, Tottenham. If you can avoid defeat in those games, you'll have a real good chance actually of getting one over. Because I think if you can stop Brentford getting past you, if you can stop Brighton getting too far away from you, and Tottenham, I mean, who knows what to make of Tottenham this season?
Yeah, Spurs, aren't they?
They're good and bad in so many different ways. That's eminent, especially at Dean Court. That's eminently winnable. You got a real good chance. And Wolves. I mean, I know there's a bit of needle in there between Wolves and Bournemouth after Gary O'Neill disappeared after a short time. But listen, you can't say you're not better off now. I think you're doing better under Iraola now than you would have been doing under Gary O'Neill if he was still in charge. Let's put it that way.
I admit that, and I was a big fan of Gary O'Neill. But no, David, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your insight. I know it's probably painful to actually go back over that game and remember, our first ever win against Manchester City.
It had to happen. Like these, it had to happen at some point. And I don't think I can sit here in good conscience and say that it's been a bad time given what I've experienced over the last 10 years of Guardiola at City. So sometimes you have to take your medicine. Sometimes you dish it out. It is what it is. It's a lot easier to swallow as well when the opposition have been good. There's been times when City have lost games when they haven't deserved to lose a game, or they've been brilliant and the opposition have scored a deflection or something, and you kind of that's when the toys come out of the pram. But I think you have to be quite humble in defeat as well as humble in victory. And I think in this instance, I think if City had scored an equaliser at the end when Foden went close, I think they would have absolutely burgled a point out of that game. I don't think they deserved it at all.
No, fair enough. Do tell everybody where they can find as well the Blue Moon podcast, because it's fantastic work that you do.
I'll just search it. Just like good old search things these days. You stick Blue Moon podcast into any browser, you'll find it. It's on Spotify, it's on Apple, it's on all the podcast players. It's very easily findable. BlueMoonPodcast.com is probably what I should plug. That's the website. There's nothing on it but how to find the website, how to find the podcast. But yeah, go and have a listen if you can.
It's funny to find out how many podcast platforms we're on as well. I haven't heard half of them.
Yeah, they just turn up and you go, oh yeah, I didn't know you could listen on that. Yeah.
There we are. But David, all the very, very best to Manchester City. I'm sure you'll get back to winning ways sooner rather than later.
And if not, it doesn't matter, does it? Like, it doesn't matter if they don't win it. Like, that's how life works. There's much more important things going on.
But Pep's last season, and for whatever people say about Pep, I really like the man. He come out, he gave us lots of credit afterwards. Some managers come out and go, "Oh, we've been unlucky," and we saw, when Arsenal beat us, it was very much like, oh, well, if Saliba hadn't been sent off, we wouldn't have got beat there. And it was like, we were the better side beforehand. But I've not seen any of that from Man City fans. I've not seen any of that from Pep. So all the very, very best to you. And I'm sure you'll get back to winning ways, mate.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you so much. And thank you for watching. do hit the like, the subscribe, and the bell button below to be alerted to any new videos we do here on Up the Cherries in all departments. Now, also do check out all of our other shows. Now, we have spoken to David Icke on this show before, so go check that out as well. We've also had the likes of Omid Jalili, the comedian. We've had Richie Neville from the boy band 5, Richard Archer from Hard-Fi, Adam Devlin from the Blue Tones, Gaz Whelan from the Happy Mondays, Damon Minchella from Ocean Colour Scene, Matthew Priest from Dodgy, and lots more as well. So go check them all out. Thank you again for joining us on this show, and we'll see you in the next one.
The Talksport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the Talksport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search Talksport Fan Network.